Hello, everybody. Welcome to episode 16 of the Catholics Against Militarism podcast. I'm honored to have as my guest today Father Tim Taugher from Saint Francis of Assisi Church in Binghamton, New York. Welcome, Father.
Welcome. Thank you very much, Ellen. Appreciate it.
We're here today to talk about the Archdiocese for Military Services and the collection that will be taking place next week on November 9th and 10th in many parishes around the United States. And this collection started in 2013. They started in every 3 years, they decided to do a collection for the Archdiocese for Military Services. And so it happened in 2013, in 2016, and it'll happen again next weekend. And the reason that I invited Father Taugher on the podcast today is because when this first happened in 2013, he and I actually were mentioned in the same article that was published by the National Catholic Reporter as two people who were sort of speaking out against this collection. So we'd like to talk about that today. And I'd like to introduce you to Father Tim and a little bit about what he's done to try to combat militarism in our country and in our church.
Mm-hmm.
So, Father Tim, could you tell me a little bit about what you did in 2013 to sort of speak out against this collection, what you did and why you did it?
Well, it was in the midst of the Iraq War. It was still going on, and our involvement there. And it kind of came out, I remember, by surprise. All of a sudden, we were having this collection, nothing ever done before. So it seemed to come out of nowhere, as it seemed. And we, felt, by surprise. And I thought, well, we're in the midst of war. And we were writing, a group of us, letters to the bishops around the country against the war. And this is from the Friends of Franz group, Franz Jägerstätter. And so our mission was to write the bishops to speak out, to break the silence, as Franz Jägerstätter said, on violence and war. And so we wrote the bishops, right? We wrote them several letters, a lot of letters. I mean, all the bishops in the country. No one responded. And we thought that was very ironic, that all these letters that we spent out, and, we paid the postage and everything else, there was no response but one bishop. And I thought that said a lot in itself, that we couldn't, we were not being aggressive, but asking to speak out about the war, the immorality of it, and support a more peaceful solution.
Right. So that's right, because it was Jack Gilroy who I interviewed. I think it was early in the series, episode 5 or 6. He actually recommended that I get in touch with you to talk to you about this collection. So you're a part of the Friends of Franz group.
Yes.
What did Franz Jägerstätter mean when he said break the silence? What does that come from? What was he talking about?
He wrote a lot about the silence of the church too. Being supportive of, at that time would be Hitler, and people engaged. It was their duty to sign up and be involved in the military. And Jägerstätter was, objected to that by the fact that Jesus said in the gospel, "Thou shalt not kill," to love your enemies. Mm-hmm. And he took that to heart. And as you may have known, we also involved with the cause of Ben Salmon, a United States Franz in many ways, who spoke up in the First World War, saying no, that he would not enlist. And again, like Franz Jägerstätter, took the commandment, the gospel, love your neighbor, and love your enemy, and no to violence. So he took that to heart too. So I just think that there is a tradition in our faith community, our Catholic faith community, and yet it isn't raised up to the stature that it should be.
Right. In fact, it seems that first of all, when you sent out the letter, you said that there was only one bishop that answered you, and That surprises me because as a layperson, I mean, I could send a million letters to the bishop. I wouldn't expect an answer, probably, but I would think that as a priest, you would have like some extra pull, or like he would actually pay attention to the priests in his diocese. But you're saying that your bishop
Well,
at the time didn't answer at all?
well, it was not only our bishop, but bishops around the country. We sent every bishop of the country a letter,
Okay.
and so it wasn't just our bishop here in the diocese; it was all the bishops in the United States Catholic Conference, and no one responded except one,
Who was the one that did respond?
Bishop Botín.
Okay. Is he in Michigan or
No, Ohio, I believe.
Ohio?
Ohio.
Okay.
He's in the Byzantine or you know Catholic.
Melkite.
Melkite, yeah. I can't get it right, but one of those.
And I believe it was Bishop Boutine who was the only bishop to speak out against the invasion of Iraq.
Right, he did, saying it was a mortal sin for his people to be involved in the war because it was immoral. And so he was very strong and direct about it.
Right.
And he was the only one.
Yeah. So what was the reaction? So your letter basically said, I will link to your letter unless you'd like to read it out. Would you like to read it?
Want me to read it?
Sure. I think I would love for
I
people to
can,
hear it.
sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
Dear Bishop, hope this letter finds you well. My purpose in writing you is to share with you my feelings and thoughts about this weekend's second collection for the Archdiocese military services. Those who have experienced the trauma of war certainly need our assistance for full recovery, as so many do suffer the post-traumatic stress disorder. I have the opportunity both to read as well as attend the workshop by Edward Tick, a clinical psychotherapist who has done extensive work with veterans and PTSD. The violence of war, as Tick notes, is a major trauma to the soul that no drug can effectively heal. As so many veterans say, war is hell, raises a question. Why, as a faith community, by our silence and lack of conscious formation regarding war in the military, send our sons and daughters to hell-war? It is very apparent why this weekend has been selected for the collection as to coincide with Veterans Day. For us in our Catholic tradition, the day is also the feast of Saint Martin of Tours. His story of conversion centuries ago is still a challenge for us today as Catholics. Two themes stand out: the encounter with Christ in the form of the poor, and the conviction that the way of Christ is the way of nonviolence. Upon his conversion, he saw his military life as totally being incompatible with the gospel and with the life in Christ. This insight prompted Martin to present himself to his military commander to request a discharge from the army, saying, "I am a soldier of Christ, and it is not lawful for me to fight," he said. St. Martin of Tours' life and words seem to resemble very closely a talk this past summer, which is in 2013, by Pope Francis. He said, quote, "The true force of the Christian is the force of truth and love, which means rejecting all violence. Faith and violence are incompatible. Faith and violence are incompatible. The Christian is not violent, but she is strong. And with what strength? That of meekness, the force of meekness, the force of love." It seems as though two competing allegiances are crying for our attention. To which do we honor? The one that upholds militarism or the one that proclaims the gospel of life? The Eucharist is the celebration of Christ's nonviolent, unconditional love. It was on the night of the first Eucharist that Jesus said to put away the sword, and then the following day, the nonviolent one did not succumb to violence, revenge, retribution, but showed the power of nonviolent love over hate. These are challenging times for us as a nation and a church, as we confront issues that put the lives of so many people at risk. We have to ask ourselves as church leaders, how are we going to preach the gospel of peace in a time of endless wars? How are we to preach the gospel of nonviolence in a country immersed in rampant militarism? These questions challenge us as a church to the spiritual and moral leadership we need to give our people and nation. For these reasons of conscience, I will be withholding materials related to the AMS collection for this coming weekend. Pray that we can authentically become a church of nonviolent love, that by our witness we will help lessen war and violence in our world.
Amen. That was a really well-written letter.
Well, thank you.
So your letter was basically saying that you were not going to participate, your parish would not participate in that collection. Did you get like reprimanded for that at all? Like, or is that a choice that priests can have? Like,
well, he sent me a letter, not happy with my decision. And then, it did get out into the national media or the National Catholic Report, and he wasn't too happy that, that got out into that means of communication. So, he just wanted to call me to task on that. But I never heard anything else after that.
oh, okay. So I assume you're not going to be doing it next weekend either.
No.
And
I forgot
I think
all about it again.
what's
But
that?
I did get the box of envelopes. They sent a parish a box of envelopes with a poster, and I think something that you could run off to be an insert in the bulletin or something like that. But no, we're not doing it.
You're not doing that. How do your parishioners feel about? Do they know about that you've taken this stance against it, or they just don't really know?
They don't know.
Yeah.
I get, it's no, they don't know. I think it's confusing, and they know, and they have come to know where I stand on these issues after 15 years, going on 16 years here. That this, I've been involved in things in the area that have caused publicity, not by choice, but by just results of action. And they know, and that's where I come from. And it's been more or less now accepted.
Was it a little bit difficult when you first arrived there, when they found out that you were willing to break the silence about war and about Catholic teaching on war and actually address it? Was it a problem?
Oh, yeah, because that was the beginning. We were only the early year or two into the Iraq War. In 2003 it started, and I came in 2004. So I was, actively involved against the war locally and then nationally, and with a group of people, activists that were on trial here at the St. Patrick's Four, and that was a big, it really caused a stir among the community, and it was very publicized because it was a big trial, federal trial. That they were being charged with the charges of their action up in Ithaca, New York. So it created a lot of discussion in our community at large, and as well as in the parish, because of a support in the sense of a fundraiser we had at the gym.
I see. So your stance got out there. Do you think that you've converted any hearts and minds in your 15 years? Or if not converted them, at least gotten people to think about it a little bit more?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, certainly people left the parish, but others have become more accepting, and I think they see the legitimacy of it. I mean, after all these years, when you look at 18 years since 2001 of the terrible ordeal in New York with the terrorist attack, and we've been in war 18 years of constant war, with Afghanistan, Iraq, and it continues to go on. It's sad that at that point in 2001, we as a country had a choice, to take the high road or the low road, and we took the low road, and we're paying the consequences of that still today. You look back at what Pope John Paul II said at that time, against going to war, and he wasn't listened to even by, I would say, even by our bishops. And certainly he was, they didn't put anything in it. He was censored in a sense of not putting his statements in the papers in our country at all. So, we were paying the consequences of a very poor decision by the country, taking the low road in response to the terrorist attacks in 2001.
Right. Right. And, I teach Catholic high school, and I teach a lot of freshmen who were not even alive when 9/11 happened. And
Yeah.
we read books about war, and I'll say, this applies to our life today. It applies to our country because our country is engaged in the longest war of its history. And some of them say, we're at war? They don't even know. It's become so normalized for our country to
That's
be, yeah, that they don't even know that we are in a war. And I said, yeah, you guys, we've been in war since 2003 or 2002. And I know, so there's this idea, we were talking the other day, and you talked a little bit about this idea of a civic religion. And I feel like next weekend, most Catholics will see in their parishes the eclipsing of the true Catholic faith and the true Catholic tradition by the civic religion. Because, as you point out in your letter, it's also the feast day of St. Martin of Tours. Veterans Day always lands almost on that day or a day after. But in church, we hear about Veterans Day. We hear about the Archdiocese of Military Services. We're told to donate to this program of chaplaincy for the people in the military, for the 1.8 million Catholics who are serving in this military. But we will not hear a peep about St. Martin of Tours and how he was the original conscientious objector who put down his sword and said, I cannot both be a follower of Christ and fight for the Roman army. It's a conflict of interest.
right.
Yeah.
I mean, it's sad, yeah, because we have a great history, a faith tradition that's great, and powerful. I mean, I wasn't taught it in high school either, but learned it on my own, and and that's why I think it's important to try to get the message out there the best as we can, integrate it into our parishes and our schools, and that's how important that is.
Yeah, and I
I mean,
think that's part of the reason why that's actually the whole reason why I started Catholics Against Militarism, which was a website, was this collection. And for me, I know a lot of people will say, well, don't you want the soldiers to have pastoral care? Don't you want them to have the sacraments? Do you want to deny them these things? And for me, no, not at all. Absolutely not. I don't want to deny anybody the sacraments. But for me, it was just coming after almost a decade of being at war and hearing the church say absolutely nothing about it. So it's in the context of that greater silence that I felt we can't just keep going along. It's like, if I could read just a paragraph that I wrote at the time, trying to explain why I wanted to, basically what I encouraged people to do was, when the collection basket went around, print out a little card that says, I don't want to donate to this for the following reason. As a small of a thing as that might be, just to register your dissent on a parish level to this constant support of the troops, support of the military, without addressing church teaching on war. And what I wrote was, a thing in motion will tend to stay in motion, and a thing at rest will tend to stay at rest, so long as no external force acts on it. And I said, sorry, I got lost. Oh, without such resistance, the motion would continue at its previous speed. Human conscience is the friction that threatens always to put an end to war. And war has its own inertia. Thus, to perpetuate the motion of war, the war makers must exert force to keep it going. And this comes through propaganda and psychological operations. The other way to keep it going is to reduce the friction of conscience, especially Christian conscience. The best way to reduce the friction of Christian conscience is to present the momentum of war as the will of God, and the soldier as an instrument of that will, or to present the fallen soldier as a victim of violence, someone who gave his life for others as Christ did. And this is the kind of greasing of conscience that I see happening in our churches. And it happens, I think, most obviously and most objectionably in the military chaplaincy. These wars could not go on if Christians spoke out against them and refused to fight them. We do have the power to stop, with our numbers, we have the power to stop this, but it offended me that they were doing this collection in the midst of the greater silence over a decade. And just knowing the message that the constant praise of veterans and thanking veterans on Memorial Day, on Veterans Day, on the 4th of July, supporting the troops, sends a message to every young man and woman in the pews that this is a noble and good thing to do. And like you said, none of them have ever been taught anything about war and peace in terms of the Catholic tradition. And it's the greater context that really, it's the collection in that greater context that I thought was problematic. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, I think in my letter, because what triggered one thing, I said Edward Tick, he's done a lot with soldiers and veterans and PTSD, and, we've heard the expression war is hell, and it's a trauma, and it's a trauma to the soul. PTSD is real soul trauma. And, I think if we as religious leaders are guardians of the soul, well, why are we putting our people in a situation where it's a trauma to the soul? It's the complete opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be the guardians of the soul, and yet we're putting them in situations of war that just has that trauma and hell, and it takes a lot to recover from. It's a lot of soul work.
Right, and I don't feel that we have lots of outreach for those who have an abortion to try to help them heal from that. But when people go and kill in war and come home wounded, I feel like the church does not have an outreach. Like, I feel like Veterans Day should be more about, if we're going to address the veterans in the church, we should say, not so much thank you for your service, but if you have been wounded by what you've experienced, we have these resources to help you. And addressing it more like that, because right now the suicide rate of veterans is it's since Vietnam, it's been through the roof. And that is that's concern for eternal souls, because according to Catholic teaching, if you commit suicide, you go to hell. But we're not talking about this. It's just stand up, let's applaud you, and then let's move on and not talk about it. It's very upsetting to me.
Right. I mean, well, veterans suffered, with, as you mentioned, suicide. I mean, what the suicide rate is phenomenal today, with ex-soldiers, veterans committing suicide, and drug and alcohol abuse and addiction, because it's something's missing in the soul of their life. And, it's like drugs, alcohol is an attempt to fill it up, and it doesn't get filled. And that's why, is what we believe, it's by God's grace that breaks the cycle of addiction. So it's to get to that soul, and that's hard work. That's going to take a lot of resources to do that, but we're not providing, that for veterans. And, when you talk about this coming November, the Veterans Day, it used to be called Armistice Day, and for peace. And then after World War II, it became Veterans Day to honor veterans. So, and, after World War I, it was supposed to be Armistice Day, for peace. And now it's Veterans Day, where, the veteran is, let's say, glorified. And I read a book recently when I was thinking about talking with you, by Jonathan Ebel, Ebel, called G.I. Messiah, Soldiering, War, and the American Civil Religion.
Oh.
And it's it was very, it just said so much to me, and it really, his work brought it all to better focus for me, what's happened in our culture and in our churches, that we've been railroaded, and where civil religion is the religion of our country, and how the GI has become a messiah. I mean, it's very thought-provoking.
I'd like to link to that, so I'll get you to send me the title again. That's a little bit about what Pete Lucier was talking about. He's a veteran from the Afghanistan war. He's in his 20s, and he was on the show, episode 4 or 5, I can't remember, but he talked a lot about that too, about why he went into the military, because he saw it as exciting. He saw it as an adventure.
Mm.
I mean, pardon my
Oh, yeah.
French, he wanted to be a badass, you know? I mean, he wanted to be respected and looked up to. And he talked about how Americans see soldiers and veterans who come back as almost like these priests of the civic religion because they engage in these sacrifices, these blood sacrifices through killing it. It's almost like a perversion of, you know,
Oh, yeah.
the Christian religion, and it's all twisted around to the point where the soldier, whose purpose is to lay down the other person's life, we pretend like they're laying down their life, but that's only if their main goal is to make the other person lay down theirs, right? Which is a total flip-flop of Christ, but somehow we've confused these things.
Did you ever hear of he was a veteran, a U.S. soldier, Joshua Castile?
Yes, I like fell in love with him. I've always wanted to do, like, before I got married, and then and unfortunately I found out that he had died. But I thought,
Yeah.
this man is like, this is the kind of man that we need in this world. I was like, I always teach my students about him.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, he was phenomenal. I mean, his story is something, and it says so much, you know, of what he did. And he was in the belly of the beast, and he got rattled, and you know, and challenged even by a prisoner, you know, in Iraq. You know, was it the prison Abu Ghraib, or
Yeah.
you know, in Iraq, where a prisoner challenged him about his faith, where it kind of started his conversion process.
Yes, I'd love to do a whole show on that. In fact, I've often wanted to interview his mother because I
Mm.
want to know where he came from, and I'd love to talk to his mother about his life. He was an interrogator at Abu Ghraib prison, and he grew up a typical flag-waving Republican conservative. Went to West Point, I think, and he got over there, and he was interrogating a Islamic militant, and he challenged him and said, you don't follow Christ. This is not at all what Christ taught. And he had to look at himself and realize, like, he's right. I'm not following Christ by doing this. There's no way Christ would ever do this. But we have to talk quickly about the just war theory, because of course the just war theory is the door that opens the possibility for 1.8 million Catholics to go into the military and participate in these wars in one way or the other. What's your stance on the just war theory? Where do you stand on that? I know different Catholics kind of think about it in different ways.
Well, when you think of in our discussion what we were talking about here in just over the last few minutes, you know, you take the just war theory, then we were talking about civil religion. We're using, you know, just war, you know, to, to support a civil religious objective, you know, and so I don't believe in the just war, because it's just does away, because our methods of war today are beyond what just war was all about when it was, the theology was written, and the doctrine written, because our means of war today are, can annihilate the earth, and we're using, low grade nuclear material in our bombs already, I think, when we look at these situations, they look at just war to just satisfy the decision that's already been made before even the practice of just war is initiated. So I didn't see it in operation in 2002, and again, we found out they lied. And you look at that too. I once looked back at my history, my life. Every war you look at, there's been a lie. It's based on some sort of lie. I never thought it would be such a bold-faced lie as what was happened in 2003. It startled me that it would be just such a bold-faced lie, and then here we are today. So I think there's so many circumstances involved that doesn't uphold the just war theory.
Right. In order to apply the just war theory, you would have to know the truth.
True.
And we know our government doesn't tell us the truth, so there's no way to really apply that. And I think one of the biggest thing that calls the just war theory into question is that if we as Catholics were really applying it and taking it seriously, and our church was teaching us about it, which they don't, you would see these like massive fluctuations in enrollment in the military of different Catholics depending on the war. You know what I mean? Like it would be a just war, and then Catholics would go fight it, and then it would be, we would all decide it was an unjust war, and we would all leave, and it would depend on, but it's basically the same no matter what war we're fighting, what president we have, where we go, what the justification is. It's just, if you're going to be in the military, you're going to fight that war. Now, I do think there are more conscientious objectors than we are told about. There are young men and women who are grappling with this, and I don't know, like Joshua Castile, where this enlightenment comes from. But I think there are some that are leaving. I once called the Archdiocese for Military Services, and I said, I'd like to get some statistics on how many conscientious objectors, Catholic conscientious objectors have come out of the military since 2003. And they told me, we don't have those numbers. We don't know. And I'm like, well, if you guys don't know, who does know? Because you would think they'd have to go through their chaplain to file for that. But you wonder what kind of a role the Archdiocese of Military Services plays. You know, are they really teaching people the gospel? Are they really telling them the truth? Or are they just there to kind of give a religious seal of approval to what the military is doing? The chaplains are, I think you told me the other day, they're paid by the military, right?
Oh yeah, they get a nice salary. I mean, they get a nice salary, and also the pension and everything after, years of service.
Right. So I don't think that they would have that job if they were truly counseling people and all their people were like defecting because they were telling them about St. Martin of Tours and telling them about the just war theory. And it's just, there's something off there. And I feel like we all kind of know it.
Mm-hmm.
So I do remember too, when one of my priests, oh, go ahead. Yeah.
I was just thinking, in our church, we have a lot on sexual morality. People, but when it comes to this area of morality, it's, it's not highlighted, there's nothing spoken about it. But, we look at morality, we only think of one dimension of morality, sex, and sexuality, but we don't look at the whole bigger context.
I was just going to say the exact same thing. In encouraging any listeners, talk to your priest about this, bring it up with them. I did this one time in Atlanta with my priest at St. Jude's in Atlanta. And I wrote him a letter because I noticed that every time we prayed for our troops and for the people who serve our country in war, we always prayed for the soldiers, but we never prayed for the civilians who are also killed in these wars. And I said, I think for the purpose of keeping people from that civic religion mentality, why can't we pray for the soldiers and the civilians who are killed in war or injured in war? Don't the civilians need our prayers just as much? And I went in and had a meeting with him about it. And he said, Ellen, I get where you're coming from. Love your enemies, pray for your enemies. And war is a terrible thing. But he said, those teachings of the church are very, very difficult. He said, they're difficult for people to process. They're almost as difficult as the church's teachings on abortion and contraception. And I said, yes, Father, but everybody knows about the church's teaching on abortion and contraception. Nobody knows about church teaching on killing in war and just war theory. And he's like, you're right. We're not afraid to go there and to scandalize people when we tell them you can't use contraception or get an abortion. But we can't, I feel like a lot of priests, and correct me if I'm wrong, are almost scared to talk about war because they're worried about their parishioners getting mad at them and not coming back to church or something. Do you think that's true?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. I mean, yeah. It was not just about war. It's other, social issues too. Like, well, way back, I would say, too, death penalty was a big topic. Priests would stay away from because it
Mm,
was controversial. Now, we know we can speak up about death penalty because it's become accepted that it's immoral and unjust. Um, and Pope Francis has even said that now and changed the teaching or the document catechism on that.
yeah.
Or you come, any of our social issues of social justice issues, please stay away from because it'll cause upset. I mean,
Yeah.
just let's say right now with concern about the climate, how many are addressing, climate change, global warming, you know,
Mm.
um, which needs to be spoken about because we're in a critical state. Yet, I don't think that's addressed too much. Maybe a prayer of the faithful or something, but maybe a homily or more teaching on that, like on Laudato Si. You don't see,
Mm.
maybe hear that or see that.
Right. Yeah. And I think global warming is controversial. I almost wish that it wasn't. We had a different way of talking about it. Because there's a lot of people who don't believe it's happening, but I think we can all agree that human activity is impacting the environment. I mean, whether or not you believe in global warming, I mean, you have to admit that as the population increases exponentially every decade, it's like we are having an impact. And so there should be room. I wish there was room to talk about some of those things, but without using the word climate change or global warming. Because a lot of people see that as being just a power grab by the oligarchs. Like they're just using that as a way to get control. And so I don't know. That's but what do you think? No, no.
No, no, no. I just say we're really going off into another whole
I know we
discussion.
are. We are, and we said we are going to keep it to 30 minutes. But yeah, I appreciate your time, and
But
so for those,
Laudato Si, I mean, if you just begin with Laudato Si, I mean, it's a phenomenal encyclical of Pope Francis, and people really, I've done a number of workshops on that, and even the Sierra Club, you know, latched onto it, so it
yeah,
it has some a common ground, and it touches people's lives
yeah,
and wakes them up to what's the reality. And I think Pope Francis did a wonderful job in that writing and being a moral voice on this issue of one of many that he has on,
yeah,
but he has a lot to offer on that. And again, the church has a lot to offer by our history and teaching in creation and
mhm.
stewards of creation. So we it's not getting down to the pews.
Yeah, yeah. It is a good encyclical. I will admit that. And we all love nature. We all love the earth. We all want our kids to be able to um, see the zebras and the lions and go to the rainforest and have a healthy place to live. So I don't think it should be as controversial as it is. When I was growing up, we just talked about like pollution and litter bugs. You know what I mean? And everyone knew that was a problem. I wish we could talk about just the obvious things that we can all recognize are happening. But when you talk about like global warming, I feel like it loses a lot of people. But that is a different topic. But the biggest polluter in the world is the U.S. military. I mean,
Military stuff.
yeah, I
Oh
mean,
yeah. Well,
that's a whole separate show we could do. Like the pollution, the bombs that we drop constantly. We're constantly bombing all the time, and they have uranium in them and
depleted
uh,
uranium. I mean, you
deplete.
talk about anti-climate. I mean, and pollution is that. I mean,
Yeah,
killing life.
right. And not just the lives of people, but people get polluted by these toxins, and then their children have deformities, and that's been going on in Iraq for a long time, and of course, no one talks about it. See the way we brought it back to our topic? That was pretty good, right?
Very good.
Okay, well, for one final question, in your letter, you said, "How are we to teach a gospel of peace in a time of endless war?" And you said, "How are we to preach the gospel of nonviolence in a country immersed in rampant militarism?" So, do you have any answers? How do we do
Well,
that?
I think since the letter that was 6 years ago. I think, again, go back to Pope Francis. He wrote an not encyclical, World Day Message of Peace and Nonviolence in 2017.
Yeah.
Then there's been 2 gatherings in Rome with world people, representatives around the world, specifically nonviolence. And a number of those people involved in those talks and discussions have lived in war-torn situations. So I think there's something's coming forth. Yes. So I mean, I think something's coming forth. I think it's positive, and we might be given more tools to work with Francis. But I believe because there's more come from Rome on nonviolence. It's my deep belief. And again, it's up to us. It's up to our bishops and the priests to get that down to the diocesan level and to the parishes. That's where our leadership comes in.
That's great. I like that. Ending on a positive note. And it can come from the top down. It can also come from the bottom up, so to speak. If you're listening to this and you're distressed by this collection, you can pray about it, think about it, and I will link to a resource on our website. If you want to just print out something and put it in the collection basket to make your voice heard, someone will have to read it. They'll probably just throw it away, but and you can also talk to your priest. I went and I'm doing a presentation in a couple weeks at my church on Ben Salmon, and I went and talked to my priest about Franz Jägerstätter and Ben Salmon, because A Hidden Life is coming out in December, the movie about Franz, and he had never heard of Franz before. And so a lot of us who are in parishes, we can go talk to our priests, and a lot of them don't know. We think that they know the teaching on war and peace, that they're just not talking about it. A lot of them, they don't know. Oh, and another positive note. Can you tell us real quick about your conversation with your new bishop? Didn't you recently have a conversation with him?
Yes. Wanted to bring him up to date, a new bishop, newly ordained bishop. And he, we had a talk with him, an appointment with him last week, and just to talk to him about our social action ministry in the diocese and the history. Talk about what has happened over the course of the years. And he was very positive and engaging, wanted to know more. We talked about what we were just sharing about Laudato Si, the importance of that, and then the immigration and the refugee crises at the border. He was very interested in that. He had some ideas himself. So it was a very, very engaging, and, we felt very positive leaving that he, is very supportive of our efforts and wants to be engaged with us and keep him informed. And so it's not the end of the conversation. He's new. I know a lot's coming at him, but, good things he said is, he wishes he could go to the border. He wants to know more when we come back. And then he went to new bishop school and Rome and met the bishop, a bishop in Baghdad, and he's become friendly with him. And so he wants to go over and see him. So, so he wasn't becoming friends with, maybe the powers to be, but, somebody like the bishop from Baghdad. So it was a very good conversation, very hopeful and positive for us.
That sounds great. Yeah, that's great. I'm glad you can get that conversation going with him. All right, great. Well, is there anything else that you want to say to anybody who might be listening before we sign off?
No. There's a lot more to say, but I think we could go on for another hour.
That's true. We got to end somewhere. So I think what I'll do is in the links in YouTube, I'll link to Father Tim Taugher's letter in an NCR. I'll link to an essay that I wrote about why I started Catholics Against Militarism, which had to do with this collection. And I will also link to the book you mentioned, G.I. Messiah. Is that what it was called? G.I.
Messiahs, plural, S.
G.I. Messiahs. Okay, I will link to that in case anyone's interested in reading that. Father, would you like to wrap up with a prayer?
Sure. Well, we pray, God, the nonviolent one, we give you thanks for the blessings of this day and in our lives. May we be peacemakers, as we heard in the gospel for the Beatitudes on All Saints' Day. Blessed are the peacemakers, for they are called children of God. May we live as your children, as peacemakers, proclaiming and living in our lives the nonviolent message of the gospel in Christ Jesus, now and forever. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much for your time today. And good luck with all of your efforts.
You're welcome.
Going down to the border soon, aren't you?
Yes, in 2 weeks from today will be our last day there.
Okay, well, maybe you'll come back sometime and tell us about what you see.
All right. Well, thanks.
That's great.
Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Have a good day.
Good luck with your work.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Thank you.